So welcome again to our interview with Circle Forward, Michelle Smith and Dee Washington, as part of the series on collaborative funding for a just transition that is kind of a joint venture, if you will, between Now What, the Now What Global Gathering, and the Thriving Resilient Communities Collaboratory, or TRCC, with a number of other partners as well. And what we're up to here is kind of some initial research, or in the appreciative inquiry process known as a discovery phase, that the heart of which is a set of interviews with people that are connected to whatever your change agenda is, to learn what the positive core is in this domain, what's really working now, what are the visions people are holding that are calling them forward. And the domain here is what we've named collaborative funding for a just transition, is based on work that we've done in the TRCC, and that we're also aware that many others have done, organizations that are part of the TRCC community and others, to gather and move money in ways that are democratic, that are based on bottom-up wisdom as well as input from the top down, and where power is shared, where there's a modeling of power with and of collective intelligence guiding this, and in the framework of a just transition, of how we create, how we address this, the many crises and challenges that we currently face at all levels, from local to global, in ways that lift up and center and support the leadership of those who have been most marginalized and oppressed and challenged by the systems that we have. And there's a lot of work going on in that domain. And our theory of change, if you will, is that processes that gather and move money collaboratively, that we're at a time, there's a sort of ripeness for that now, and that we want to do something in 2021 that's of service to what's already emerging in that. And so this discovery process is to get a sense of what is in motion that we can support, what are the needs that different organizations or networks have, what's being offered that can support them, who are the funders that are ready to play in this way, all of that, and then to do something or set of things. For now, we're calling it an action learning lab in 2021, based on this, and there'll be a kind of a funding proposal that comes out of this work, as well as a report. I'll say a couple more things to sort of set the context. The TRCC's focus has been within the United States, and particularly in some regions within the United States. We want to host, we imagine this lab is global in scope, and that it includes the global South, and that we're not limited to the geographic framework we've had so far. And we also kind of don't know. We're trying to hold off too much on designing things until we've completed this discovery process. And then just sort of theoretically, I think this metaphor might help for people that aren't used to thinking about what this is. If you think about the relationship between a forest, particularly a mature old growth forest, let's take the Amazon, for example, and the clouds that provide the rain for that forest. The forest actually, we now know, calls forth the rain from the clouds, and much of the moisture in the rain even comes from the forest itself, as well as from other places. The clouds dump the rain. They don't decide where that water goes or how it gets distributed. The forest does that because it's got this whole complex network of relationships and processes built up over a great deal of time, that allows it to hold and store and move and recycle that water in an incredibly complex manner, right? And that's what we want to see happen in the relationship between sources of money, whether it's philanthropy or investment capital, and the ecosystems of transformation that they want to serve. And part of the hypothesis is that there are funders who would gladly provide large amounts of money if they trusted that it was doing transformational work, and they don't see where those opportunities are now. They don't trust that the existing methods they have for moving that money will really create a future distinct from the past. They might, reduce harm, they might reform things, but to really create something new. Meanwhile, there's this whole ecosystem, or there's the equivalent of many forests of transformational work going on, and to a large extent, they need a lot of rain. They need more rain. They're ready. This is our theory of change. They're ready to take in these resources, not just money, but money is important in this world in order to make this transition. And so, can we do something to in a sense, be the kind of the chemicals that the forest releases up into the clouds that bring the rain down almost? There's lots of ways we can play. Anyway, that's a very long-winded introduction, but one thing I've noticed in these interviews is that the context is tricky here. Appreciative inquiry works really well if you're all part of an organization or you're all part of a community, and you all kind of get where you come from and where you are and what you're doing together, and you can already can align around some change agenda if it's named. We're dealing with something much more kind of diffuse and complex here. So I hope that that's useful in terms of just what we're trying to learn, So what we want to learn from the two of you, Michelle and Dee, really is what is working well and what your visions are for where we're going. We have some explicit questions for getting at that. So we'll do the interview, and then I'll maybe offer a few reflections, myself. If Dunya and Leslie were here, I would bring them into, and then we'll bring in the rest of you into the conversation, probably staying in one group since we're small. Maybe we'll use breakouts, but hopefully we'll have at least 20 minutes for that latter part. And I think that's probably enough to get us ready, unless you have questions, Michelle or Dee, from there. A smile. All right. We haven't been doing this in the other sessions, but I kind of feel a little bit of a need to just say, can we get the, forget the expression, the elevator speech, right? The very short version of Circle Forward and what your work is, for the benefit of people on this call who aren't familiar with it and others who might be listening.
Okay, Michelle, I'm gonna let you open, and then you can also speak to Les, and then I can go if you're okay with that. You're muted.
So, Circle Forward Partners is a consulting, coaching, and facilitation firm. Dee and I are consultants and partners in the firm. And we help networks, we support them as they're creating their structures for governance. And we find that these collaborative networks, what works well for them is collaborative governance and consent-based governance. So, and we're finding that using consent-based governance provides that sweet spot of equity and forward momentum and trust and transparency that's needed. Well, the transparency and trust that's needed to create the forward momentum. I kind of gave, so that's Circle Forward. And so we're working, this consent-based collaborative governance, a lot of people who are in this space here with What Next are familiar with sociocracy and sociocratic governance, and we're definitely rooted in that system. But we found that there are some things that are different about working with networks. That as we tried to sort of apply sociocracy directly to networks, we found there were bottlenecks, and we're in this transformative experimental space like that we're all in, and so we found that consent is that keystone principle, and then there are other things that networks need as they create their governance structures, and that's what we help them do.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. What I would like to say is probably that the elevator speech of Circle Forward from me is just so to give you a sense of who I am and how I landed here with Circle Forward. Can you all hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great. How I landed with Circle Forward is that I worked in communities. I was doing community development work in low-income communities, and I was responsible for a program that provided grassroots grant making, seed funds. And so essentially grassroots grant making in the US was by Kellogg Foundation, Annie Casey Foundation, lots of these large scale foundations trying to get money to folks on the ground. And grassroots grant making was a way to do that for them. And they did it through the community foundations, and which my organization was funded by a community foundation. My work was to provide technical assistance on the ground for projects and development. And so we kind of, my organization was working actually bottom up, right? Like, so we would pilot programs and different things like that, and then they would grow, and then there would be additional funds available, et cetera. But what I found in that funding scheme, kind of working, was that there were all sorts of issues, and which kind of brings in this idea of collaborative funding, right? And so one of the things that happened for me was that I was very frustrated with the way the funds were distributed and the way power was distributed. And I left that work, and I went into co-op development and started to do work in cooperatives. And part of my work is where I met Circle Forward and, the folks at Circle Forward. And I realized, democracy or democratic practice is one person, one vote, but it only takes 51% of people, right, to outmanage another group of people, right? And that's all you need to do. So what you see is organizing around getting that power and getting that number. And so for me, coming across and meeting folks from Circle Forward and eventually joining the team to do this, this was the tool that was needed for decision making, right? The linchpin that provided consent for all, that was the equalizer for decision making and listening to folks across spectrum. And it was the work, and I discovered that this was the tool that we needed in a lot of the community development work that I'd done previously in the education system, the health system, and municipal decision making. So I know this isn't an elevator speech, but I just wanted you to understand the framework, right, of how I got here, which is we need a tool, a process, a set of values that is going to make that collaboration ignite, right? And the linchpin for governance, so people are making decisions, but it's not a sexy topic, right? It's not, governance, like, what are you talking about? Well, you have to have the buzz. It's not a buzzword, it is real, right? But we continually talk about equity, but we do not talk about how to operationalize equity, right? Like, how do we distill that? And so the focus with Circle Forward is very much on not talking about the what, but focusing on the how. And so we are working with people to do that. So for me, that's the elevator speech behind Circle Forward for me.
It's just a very tall building.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Oh, I love you. Yes, a very tall building.
And maybe the elevator isn't one of those supersonic ones. Maybe it's there's an elevator operator and the thing moves slowly.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, right? Is that
Time to have a conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not all about speed and scale.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No, thank you both. And I'm realizing that when we did the check-in about why it's important to you to be here on the call, that I didn't name. I'm particularly excited about talking to the two of you because you have so much to offer on this key piece of the governance process, how the decisions get made. That's absolutely essential to it all working. And and so I know you have a lot of experience to offer, and I can imagine, in the work that we do next year, I hope we find a way to bring you in to be of service to some of the different groups that decide to participate in this, that it all comes to be. So
Well, we work in a lot of different kind of networks: economic development, public health, large-scale landscape conservation. But for me personally, this deep cultural transition, this deep transformation to a just transition, where we're really understanding that we need to transition to an economy that is equitable and ecologically sound. That's deep values for me. And I really believe that collaborative governance has an important role to play. So that's really one of the reasons I thought that I wanted to be here, is because it's my heart, my heart and my strong belief is that that's where we need to go. And that's why I'm involved in collaborative governance, because I think this is like Dee, I'd worked in a lot of different spaces, and it was like, when I saw this, it's like, oh my gosh, that's what's been missing.
Yeah.
And it's not,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
people don't know, people don't know they don't always know they're doing governance. And sometimes it's like,
I know.
well,
To Dee's point, it's not.
we don't need to learn how to do that. We don't need to learn how to, if everybody's nice and the space is open, then it'll be fine. And we'll use what we know how to do, and then it keeps crashing.
And I'd like to offer, I'd also like to offer on a personal level, like we often talk about ourselves in terms of the organizations or the work on a large scale, but from a personal perspective, I just wanted to say that, so we're in the South, like Michelle is in North Carolina, I'm in North Carolina in the South, and I was born in Massachusetts in the United States, which is a northern, it's in the North, right? And my father was from the South. And I live in a historic home that my family's owned for 86 years, right? And the house was 100 years old this year. But when I moved to this community, one of the things that really, and connect with, I guess what I'm gonna say is, I have the fortune of, or the privilege of being able to walk the walk and talk the talk on the ground in the communities on a real level, right? So that was how I was in that work. So what does it look like when grassroots leaders are doing bottom up? And then I had the privilege to be able to also, and I'm sorry, I thought I turned all these devices off. But I've also had the privilege to be able to work in the circles that operate with that funding, right? So I was a part of the community, but I was also a part of, so there's a real, when it's like, what drives me around collaborative governance is because I want to see that transformation. And it wakes up for me when I see leaders that I'm working with side by side on a municipal, on a local level, and then moving up to these networks that are also impacting the decisions on the ground. So I get an opportunity to kind of move up and down the spectrum a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my personal connection.
Yeah, well, that might be a really good segue into the first part of the interview, where we want to hear a specific story from each of you. Something with detail. This happened at this time with these people, that has something to do with our general, theme of collaborative funding for just transition. So, and something that was successful, a story about something that really worked well, that was valuable, where you learned a lot, or, just was a high point. When you think about it, when you look back on it, you just kind of feel the energy of what happened there. So you probably have two different, you could both wind up telling the same story from different angles or whatever, but I'm curious, even in what you were just naming, Dee, if there's something about, right there.
I'll share a story, and then that'll limit me, Michelle. Right? We're tag teaming, right? So that'll limit me. I will say that, okay, here's the story, and I'll try to, so the communities that I was working in, there were grassroots leaders, right? And there was a lot of impact on, as they were going through leadership development training and different things, they were becoming more vocal in municipal, projects, education, et cetera. And the local community foundation really loved asset-based community development, wanted to increase the work. And what happened was that oddly enough, and I'm just going to say oddly enough, I know this is being recorded, so I don't know, but our local United Way, because United Way has a reputation, right? Like, and they provide services. And so our local community foundation kind of connected our organization with the United Way to say, not to become a recipient of United Way funds, but United Way wanted to fund, in our local area, wanted to fund kind of this grassroots bottom up. They said, we did not get into these problems in a day, in a grant cycle. We got to be in it for the long haul. And that was what helped our community foundation say, well, then let's start with these leaders. We didn't know it at the time, but these leaders who were learning to own their own power and want to have equity in the power system. And so the long and the short of it is that we worked to provide grassroots grants. There was lots of technical assistance, but overall, the funder gave these group of residents who were working with them through a process the ability to make decisions around $1.2 million and where United Way was putting those funds. So to me, that was a huge success. And the steps to doing that was dialogue, et cetera. But I give that story as a success story, but I also want to say, as a caveat here, what I know that initiative lacked was a collaborative way of decision making, because before I transitioned into co-ops, what I could see were the natural power structures that would evolve and emerge, because where power is, and you have leaders in the room that feel very like, let me pull back, right? They must know more. My voice isn't important. So I'm going to say, from a funding standpoint, and I know that's not what you mean about the collaborative, maybe about collaborative grant making, but what I want to say is that what was successful out of that initiative for me was that everyone was willing to come to the table and learn and be open. So the process, and whoever the stakeholders are, right, need to come to be open in the process and be learners together. And so right now, and where I am is in the space of being learners together and having effective decision-making tools. And so I've been contacted by some of those folks that I did that work with, who are considering bringing this in as a part of that. So that's my story.
Oh, beautiful.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. I have a story about one of our first networks that we worked with, which was a food systems network. And it was a core team. They were making decisions about how they were going to award many grants to on-the-ground projects that addressed community food security in a region. So this is across states. There was 3 states involved. And imagine, all the different players there, including people on the ground in food insecure places, both in the city and in rural. So it was food banks, farmers, distribution. There's a diverse group of people. And there was urgency to get these funds out to the field. And so it put pressure on this team to make the decision. So there were academics, there were institutional partners, and there were community-based organizations who might actually want to apply for these mini grants. And so they valued having these different perspectives at the table as they discussed the funding priorities and how to make the application process more accessible. But then there were conflicting opinions when it came to designing the application. And there were questions of ethics and values, and that's, where we get, to with our conflicts. So was it ethical for members of community agencies to participate in the design of the actual application when it might apply for grant funds? And when a professor was like, no, and a community agency representative said yes, and they weren't able to resolve this issue in the meeting, and so they made plans to meet separately to unpack their concerns. And that could have happened in the meeting, but this case happened to meet separately. But when they met, so they did it because they had a coach and a facilitator there who's grounded in this consent within a range of tolerance decision making. Instead of debating, they were inquiring what's out of range of tolerance, and they ask, what's the risk we can't afford to take? Asking that question and listening for objections about what was unacceptable risk. And I'm just going to say that this idea of objections is super important, because people who don't typically have and have not had positional power and have been in marginalized, that even stating an objection, speaking an objection, is a high risk moment. And I think Dee pointed this out to us even more than anything else and some of the other people we've worked with. But what they were actually get to was, like, the professor was actually concerned that there might be a perception of conflict of interest. He wasn't concerned that there was an actual conflict of interest. It was the perception. And then the community partners were concerned that if, we're applying, about the integrity of inviting community-based representatives into the decision-making process and then withholding the power when things got sticky. So that was the power dynamic. It was all too familiar, and the professor was concerned there might be a perception of conflict of interest, and the agency director was worried about the integrity of whether or not this really is shared power. So it had gotten heated, and it was both and. We need trust of the wider community, and we need trust with this team. And so they came to a decision that the community organizations who were applying for the grant could be involved when there was not a conflict of interest, and they'd be really transparent about the process. They could include the partners about the application design, but then if there was a conflict of interest about deciding who got that money, then those partners wouldn't be in that decision-making realm. So it was, it was a place where things could have gone off the rails, and it almost, like, a lot of times in these things you don't even notice because things go smoothly instead of going off the rails. So that's one. And what we found again and again, I was just saying before we started, we just got a video from a network that we've been working in Alaska, and we're going to be posting, where one of the leaders from the First Nations talks about how in the beginning he was very untrusting, in the beginning he was very skeptical, and now, having seen his objections integrated and having been a part of a project where they're building the structure of governance context specific to their work, that he's like, I totally trust this network. And people are joining the network. People are wanting to be a part of it. And so this is evidence of success.
Yeah, I'm here. You wanted to add something, Dee? I have a next question, but and we have two more after this to get to. Three more. You're muted, though.
Thank you. Were you talking about the Center for Environmental Farming Systems? Was that the network you were talking about? Oh, okay. The reason I'm asking, the reason why I wanted to bring that up a little bit is because there are groups right now, I'll let you get to that next question, but there's so many to riff off of, because we have groups right now. One of our North Carolina State University is using the system of collaborative governance and putting that in their farm systems work. And the reason I was asking whether it was that network or not is because what I actually encountered was that the leaders that I had trained in the community previously had ventured out into some farm work. They started working with the university, and it circled back around. So all of a sudden we're starting to see, this idea of circling forward, like you're starting to see that catch fire. So the conversation and the dialogue is elevated because people are looking at, how are we making these decisions together through a consent-based practice, which is different than consensus. But anyway, I'll stop there.
So, but if I'm getting you correctly, you're saying that some of the people in your story might have actually wound up in Michelle's story.
Yeah.
Well, been that other network. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And other stories.
Yeah.
Well, so the next question just kind of, builds off of the two stories a little bit. to tease out, what are some of the key elements that we, that were present that allowed for these stories to be stories of success. And, I've already heard things, around, the importance of dialogue, everybody coming to the table to learn and be open, trust, that there were local leaders that were right there in the middle of it all. And, in your case, Dee, and Michelle, and in your case, that there was a willingness to look at ethics and values and understand them, to rethink sort of old stories around conflict of interest was really important, and then the decision making process that said, what's the range of tolerance, what's an acceptable risk, and managing that conversation with allowing for objections and creating the space for that. So those are some of the things I heard, but I wonder if there's more that you want to tease out and think, what's at the heart of why these are success stories. What were some of the values or the resources or the assets or the principles, that we might want to look at and say, yeah, well, let's make sure we've got those in the next things that we do, right? There's lessons there.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead?
You want to go, Dee? Yeah.
Did I go first last time? I'm trying to be equitable. Make sure. Okay. To
If
me,
you got something, go.
To me, because I'm also a student of this work, right? We are all practitioners and students of the work. And I think that what I have seen is that one thing that is critical to me is that that there's a vision for that type of equity, right? Like you have to, if you go in and you're trying to convince a group that this is what they need to do, they may not be there yet. Like the groups that I've seen are like, we're not going to get through this unless we have decided that equity is a priority. We don't know how to get there, but that's a priority. If equity is not a priority, then folks, you're kind of, and then you have to be willing to go the distance, and when I say go to the distance, what I mean is you're in it for the long haul. We didn't come up with systems overnight. These systems have existed that have created inequities, or inequitable balance, right? Like, and we're trained into it. If we're going to a school anywhere, we're being trained into that system. So it's not going to be undone overnight, right? So for me, success was having a funder who was like, we're doing this and we're going to fail forward. We're not afraid to fail forward because everything teaches us something. You have to have an adaptive ideology. We're willing to adapt. What's safe enough to, good enough to try, safe enough to fail, and adapt forward. So, but what made, for me, I will say that, and the last thing I'll say, Michelle, and I'll let you go, is that one of the other things in a more recent network is that we're talking about equity. And in America, equity is often only talked about in terms of racial equity. And I like to use this metaphor. I'm going to use a metaphor now, Michelle, and I hope that segues helps. But one of the things I had to say to a network was the importance of supporting these networks or these collaborations is because they act almost like a watering hole, an oasis, right? The people that we're working with in the current network that I'm working on right now, one of the things I had to say to them was, it's an ecosystem. There are bunnies and rabbits and squirrels and snakes and all in the ecosystem, but this is the network they're doing is on public health, and this is the watering hole, right? You've gotten funds, all of that. But there were some people, as we were getting started, who were like, yeah, and they, the bunnies were saying, yes, but the lions who are at the table are ravaging our people and dismantling them and eating them, so they can't leave, right? That's what happens. And so the bunnies were like, we shall make the rules for everything about this watering hole. And I said, you are right to be able to bring up, right, what has happened out here in the ecosystem. But this is everyone's watering hole. And we all have to decide what are the rules that are governing drinking from this watering hole, which means everyone who drinks from this hole has a place at the table. They were resisting putting together a a group that would make the decision. And they did. And I guess the reason I'm telling you that story is that I want to make sure I make a distinction around equity for all, as opposed to just one type of equity, because in societies we experience racial inequity, sexism, racism, ageism, right? So the governance, so I'm not trying to just be like, oh, collaborative government. I'm not trying to do that. But what I'm saying is that I'll say that, and this is the last thing I'll say, I'll slow down. I'll slow down. We are always choosing how we're going to make decisions. If you decide to start a business tomorrow, you can decide to be a corporation, a nonprofit organization. But when you choose what type of organization you're going to be, network, whatever, you're choosing a governance system. You're choosing how you're going to decide. In collaborative governance and collaborative funding, we're making up those rules because they don't exist. And so that's why I appreciate the work, Ben, that you all are doing in this exploratory. And so, yeah, what I would say is one of the key components, if you're going to work in collaboration, is that you're equipped with the tools of collaboration, because it's not native. I'll stop.
No, thank you. Those were, so important. The idea that it takes time, we're in it for the long haul. We're also, there's no, perfect model for this either. So, and there are all these complex relationships in history. And if you want real equity, you have to be able to work with that. And it's not just along one dimension. I think all of those are so critical. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dee. There's a couple things to just add to that, which is that, so what needs to be in place for this to work, and when in the stories that have been successful. And early on in our work, something that needed to be in place was pain. Like, people were finding that the ways that they were trying to do this network work was running them into a ditch.
Mm-hmm.
And here we came, circle forward with this little, with this sociocratic background and some ideas, and as well as some structures and processes and practices that could be put in place. And then slowly they got themselves out of the ditch. So there was this, so early on there was pain. Less now, there's less pain than there is. This value has already been put in place for equity. But the reason the value is put in place for equity is because they don't want the pain. It's not to be nice. It's that that's what works to move the needle on the process, right? So justice is key because, you know why? Because interdependence is a fact. It's not to be nice. Interdependence is just a fact. And this independence that we came up with,
racism hurts us all.
Racism hurts us all. It hurts us all. It hurts us all. And so the other thing that has to be in place is that the people with positional power need to feel assured that, as Dee was saying, that their needs are going to be met as well.
Right.
They have responsibility, they're holding money, they've got accountability, they've got a perspective. And because our system is very vote-minded, the assumption is, even when we're using consensus, thinking we're doing consensus, that we're going to get our needs are going to get overwhelmed somewhere. It's going to be outvoted, or it's going to get shadow power dynamics are going to happen, or it's going to be incredibly slow because every single decision's got to be talked about forever and ever and ever. And so the one thing that's really helped is when those folks with the money, with the positional power, can be assured that, my objections are going to be honored too. If I see a risk we can't afford to take, that's going to be in place too. And then the other thing that has to be in place is a realization that there is a need for, at least in the beginning, to have a culture shift, to have a transformational shift, that it's good to have some coaching and some processes and practices to put in place, and that we have to learn together So a willingness to be vulnerable and learn these things together. There are no 10 easy steps to transformation. Networks are new in our culture. And we're doing this, we're learning, we're the generation that's learning. So when I hear that farmers who've experienced consent were in that circle and they're coming back, my heart sings, because that's how it's got, like, networks are such a powerful leverage point for spreading this deeper democracy. Now, I want to just finally say that collaborative governance is not just decision making.
Yeah.
Decision making is just key, because everything else decisions get made about. And so I put into the and I might even screen share in a minute if you want me to, but I put a link into the chat of our collaborative governance canvas. It's all the 8 issues, or at least 8 issues of network governance that all networks are going to need to deal with, and that we're, helping networks work their way through to make sure from wherever they are, starting wherever they are, and then they all touch each other. Those are some things that came to mind that what need to be in place for success stories.
We could just stop and just take
we're out of time.
Play it, I'm reminded of one of the agreements I've noticed groups doing more and more for incompleteness. We only have a certain amount of time in this gathering, and we're not going to cover everything, and it's so rich. So things like the Canvas, please share the link, and we'll make it available as we share this interview too. I'm also holding some concern that we have time to weave in the people on the outside of this fishbowl right now. And I do want to get to the 2 other questions. So maybe we can do that in about 10 minutes. And then we'll have 20 to bring in the others, and some final thoughts at the end. But I just want to honor the incredible wisdom and the depth of experience, and struggle, I'm assuming too, that took to get to the clarity that you have in what you just named. Yeah. All right. So the next question is a setup for the final one. Which is that if you, it's fun and don't have to overthink it. And again, being pretty concise will be important, so we have more time for the 4th question. This one, let's keep short. If you had 3 wishes that could come true by the end of 2021 to move your work forward, what would they be? And since there are 2 of you, you can each have 3 wishes, or you can come up with 3 between the 2 of you, whatever. Why don't we just do one, we'll just see where it goes.
My wish is that the networks who are working towards a just transition could be really deeply grounded and have as part of their culture. My wish would be that everybody would know how to make decisions in groups based on consent and would understand governance because they've been doing it. And they've been,
Yeah.
And then they would never be able to be dominator governed again.
I would resonate that as well. I think if I had 3 wishes, if I could wave a magic wand, speaking as someone who came out of the asset-based community development community, I would if I could wave a magic wand, I would ask funders to pick a project that was, good enough to try, safe enough to fail, and use that as their pilot, because you cannot make parameters for people to be equitable. You have to give them the tools to do it. So they would, focus on making sure that their leaders, because when you talk about a just transition, one of the things I would say is that in the story with the bunnies and the lions, right? You can't assume that the bunnies know everything that needs to be known to make the decision about the watering hole just because the bunnies were the ones being ravaged, right? They have a very unique, very clear perspective about what it doesn't look like. And the lion knows what he wants, right? But the ability, so don't make the assumption that the bunnies have the keys to equity. The key to equity is that all the representation and all the unique needs are heard and identified and dealt with. And so that's why I'm saying if I could wave a magic wand, I would ask that for those people who are trying to be collaborative decision makers and getting that money to the ground, that whatever project you choose, doesn't matter to me, make sure your leaders are equipped to do collaborative governance and not a reciprocity type governance, right? Like, we didn't like this, so now we swing the pendulum in the other direction, and then we just swing back and forth with the pendulum. So my greatest wish would be pick a project, equip your leaders who are leading the project.
My third wish would be that funders would be using collaborative governance in their directors' boardrooms themselves, learning how to do it themselves, so they could, from experience, see, yes, because they're rich, they're not in enough pain, and so they're not, wanting to learn these new skills. They think they know.
Yeah. And I'm not adding a wish. I'm just resonating with Michelle by saying that although we are consultants who do this work, we equip the leaders who will be doing this work. We are not trying to be the masterful consultants in control of all things consent or collaborative. As much as we can push it out, right? And the people are carrying this forward, which we have lots of people who are doing that. The university doesn't come back to us anymore and say, oh, come, and they might get tweaks here and there, but the reality is that if you're a funder and you get it and you have, you can help the people you're funding, but I want the funders to get it themselves, get it themselves and equip the leaders for a different type of just transition that's actually just.
Yeah.
All right.
We're definitely wanting to work ourselves out of jobs.
Yeah, well, I have a feeling there'll still be more work. It's a big world, but maybe you get to retire.
Leadership. Yeah, and facilitative leadership is part of that vision. So we're always hopefully going to have facilitative and consulting, when it's needed, but we really want those networks to have it so in their culture that they have those skills and practices and they just continue.
Yeah.
All right, last question. We can do it.
Yeah, we do it.
So imagine now it's the end of 2021. Your wishes have come true. Or are well on their way. Things are moving. Something's happened between now and then. And part of what has happened is that there's been some kind of set of experiments or action learning labs, and we've collaborated and we've brought in other people, other organizations, and we've had some funding to do it, and so you're now looking back from that place of success and saying, yeah, we've got groups that are doing consent. They're learning how to do consent because they've done it. We've got funders who picked a project as a pilot, and they were willing to learn, and they had the tools to do that work. And the funders, maybe they also said, we're going to try this internally, right? We're going to do it in our own meetings as well. So those three things, they've happened. And so I want you to, from that position in the future, this is important. People have some resistance to this for whatever reason, but be playful with it. Look back from there, and in the past tense, this has happened. imagine it's real, and tell a little bit of a story about that, and make some stuff up about what it took, and who was there, and if you can add some details, some tastes and smell. If you want to just sit for a minute, I mean, let's do like a minute of silence while you're just sort of enjoying this success that you had, and then tell us about it. All right, so I'm gonna actually set the timer for a minute and just slow things down. And again, it's really important to get the full juiciness that you play along and describe it in the past like it has happened. Okay. So we'll be back in a minute. And you ready?
Okay.
What happened?
Shall I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
You want to go first, Dee, or you want me to?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so in 2021, we had learned from our first collaborative governance accelerator pilot so much, and we were doing a similar accelerator for networks who were wanting to build their governance structures, and so this cohort included funders from this movement towards just transition. It included some other people too, but we had some great networks. And then this crazy, and then crazy thing number 42 happened in 2021 in the culture from just like 2020, things were just coming out of the blue that just shook up the whole economy. It shook up the whole political world. It just shook up everything. And this group had built so much trust, and they had deep understanding of collaborative governance and consent-based governance. And they had been practicing and learning, and they had enough people within their network who had the skill sets to take it out, that we were able to respond deeply within our culture to this crazy thing, this disruption that happened, and a huge leap towards a just transition occurred because they'd all come together and they'd gotten that, and it was something that the dominant culture never saw coming. They didn't even see it, and then all of a sudden there was just so much power, because these people were networked and they could make these decisions, and they could all stand behind them really strongly, and they could say, no, this is what we're doing. This is how we're responding. And that dominant power structure didn't even see it coming and kind of just had to go along. Because there was so much clarity that this had been happening. That's fantasy.
Wow. Michelle, were you in my head? Were you in my head? Like, you totally took my script. What did you do, right? It was said so well. I'm like, I'm with her. I'm with her. Yeah. Wow. I can't come up with anything better than that. I will tell you, like, when you tell me to go into the future, I do an activity similar to that. And when I go, I go way into the future, but I'm like, yeah, he did say, right? Yes, Dita, the future has been summoned. We are grabbing it and snatching it, right? I'm right there with you, Michelle. I think that what I saw in a year was that, I've often said the most important three letters in the alphabet are ICU, right? ICU. And after a year of doing, consent, people practicing this, they are like, whoa, we have not been seeing each other. We could be doing this so freaking differently. You exist. And we can make this work. Like, so inspired that the next pilot goes even more aggressive, right? Like, what does this look like if we put it in the school system and this, and these new structures? And So there's this cascading effect. It's like the domino effect. I expect that everyone that I've worked with who come into contact with their self-actualization personally, but collectively, right? You know, making these decisions goes, I exist, you exist. And so all of a sudden, that thing that Michelle's talking about, like you can't even, there's nothing you can do about it because now I see you. So all of these different, so to me, yeah, so that's what it is that at 2021, at the end of 2021, all of these experiments, if we do it well in these collaborative ways, if funders choose education, public health, you know, all of these different areas, housing, doesn't matter, pick a project. If everybody at the end of it gets, I see you, and we've not been seeing each other, and what would happen is we can do this better. Like this is whoa. And it just becomes the catalyst. It's the domino. So, and I would love personally to see that happen in business structures and education. Those are, to me, if I could see it happen anywhere, like everybody talks about housing and all this, the problem, the reason how we are perpetuating the systems of oppression are through our organizational structure. Somehow somebody says, hey, let's fund a business that's a co-op kind of thing, and we do it differently. And now all of a sudden we're doing that in food and we're doing it, you know. So anyway, my vision was that all of a sudden when you gave us that, I saw that people could see each other, and then the minute that they could see each other, they could hear each other and heal our environmental issues. We'd listen to our young people. Our young people that we've educated will show up and know they have power to speak. We're educating our little ones on ways of being better. Like somebody got hold of this and said, plant the seed. This is we don't know where it's gonna go, but we see these kids, we see people, and there it goes. So that was mine was right. It wasn't the same as Michelle's, but it's that rift, you know, I see you. Because that's what equity and the yeah, I won't, and I'll wrap up the comment by saying equity is not synonymous with harmony. Like we've been ignoring so many voices at the table for so long that when you create an equitable decision-making space, you're going to hear voices you haven't heard before. So buckle up, buttercup, because it's not going to be an easy ride. But if you commit to it and use these processes, or, you know, use these processes, and not just the processes, but the values and how you're bringing values into your work, with communication, transparency, all the things in the link, people should walk away feeling like this gentleman in the Native American community was saying, you know, I trust it, right? People see me and I see people. So I believe that if you're a funder and you choose a project at the end of 2021, you're gonna instantly know there's a better way we could have been doing this, and the innovation is just gonna spark from there. So that's what I'm hoping. And grandparents can know that their kids are going to be okay and that there actually will be a future. Go figure. Anyway, sorry.
So on the theme of I see you, I'm switching to gallery view, and I want to see everybody, and I'm hoping Dita, Les, and Tanya that that we can hear your voices. You know, there's a process called the fishbowl, and we haven't quite done it this way yet in these, but I would love to just have the three of you now be the voices. We step back. Maybe Trevor can participate too, I don't know. And just, you know, have a conversation among the three of you about, you know, what this brought up for you, how it connects to your own work, or what inspiration you got, or wherever, you know, but, you know, and I think that's a way of showing, yes, that that Dee and Michelle have been seen and heard as well. So are you down for that? For 10 minutes or so? All right, cool. So I'm going to, here, I'll spotlight you, and that way you'll just see one another, which I think is kind of nice. So we really try to do the fishbowl. I'm going to let you self-facilitate.
So what arose your curiosity the most? Like where do you both find yourselves actually being active in this?
Do you want to take that, Michelle?
No,
Okay.
wait. This isn't a Q&A with
This is for the
Michelle.
three of them.
This is a conversation
Oh.
among Tanya, Les, and Dita.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Got it. Good. Oh, I love
You can
it.
sit back.
Go ahead.
Take it
Take
in.
it
Well, I'm
in.
going to say from London, UK, and I know Dita's based in the West Country in the UK. This is just so really outside of my experience to actually hear the articulation of all that you've said. I totally get. Dee, I've done everything you've done up to the point that I'm actually doing the leadership training. I chair the Permaculture Association Britain. You know, as Michelle, and I don't know whether you know, Dee, I've done a fair bit of sociocratic training and practice. And I'm working with Michael Linton on the Open Money program, because what that brings in is the opportunity to use our own effort, our own skills, our own power to actually to create an economy through which all this can take place, rather than having to wait for government funding. The whole of my experience of funding in the UK is it's totally misdirected and will continue to be. And we suffer from food banks in the UK. We never had food banks 5 years ago, and that is just dragging us down. So there's a lot of the very worst that unfortunately we witness. And it's great to know where all your states are. I know where you all live now. We've been watching the elections, so we know all about you guys. We've seen it. But so I did and I'm going to just complete Dita and Tanya and pass that. I'm part of the SOFA, Sociocracy for All. There's a permaculture circle, and we held an online conference 3 weeks ago to discuss online how permaculture and sociocracy work together. And I was going to do a workshop on how a community currency system with permaculture and sociocracy can work together. And that's the kind of work I'm doing in the UK. And I'm going to really be contacting all of you guys, because Dee and Michelle, the way you articulate it in your experience, I think would go down a storm down here. But I'm sure, you know, I do know a lot of the work of Nate Whitestone and others. So great stuff. I'm really delighted. Now I can say why it was important I was on the call. Remember? Yay. So I'll pass to Dita.
Thank you, Les. And now you're also added to my list of I need to write immediately to continue this conversation. I'm almost getting emotional. I mean, this has been just amazing. I've been looking for ways of integrating that I see you and your vision of the future, Michelle, of you know, giving power back to the powerless, the people who have been, you know, with great ideas, never heard. Everybody has the solution. We never listen to it. And that is just so empowering. And then I'm always, yeah, I'm quite ignorant on the financial side of things. And then just seeing the part and slightly like, oh no, money's bad. But, you know, seeing the power of it that you're bringing with it, it's an eye opener. And I feel, yeah, I feel blown away. So thank you very much. And yeah, I have like, I don't know, 300,000 questions. So I'm just going to leave it there, and just really in deep gratitude for just listening to you and knowing that this is happening. Tanya.
Hi. I'm struggling with my own, or with my inner barriers and a sense of impossibility. We talk about, sounds a lot like ancient traditions of, you know, the elderly council. Of course, understanding the patriarchal subjugation structures in which women are imbued in those indigenous communities. I mean, that's something not to be overlooked. But in hearing you, it's como, I feel separated or split in half, because I wonder, how do you build this magnificency in context of extreme violent conflict, in context where the exchange point is corruption, where perception of self-value is intricately, intrinsically como imbued, related, como así, with the sense of power and the sense of transition. And as I heard the word transition, I became increasingly angry, because transitions imply a direction in many cases. And our government in Mexico is called la cuarta transformación, the fourth transformation, the fourth transition. And it's just, and they are building on consensus. And so how do you draw that line? How, and of course it's an open question to all of us, because I don't think it's only about methodology as it is a human question. Like, how do you address human nature in these facilitations that you're talking about, which I'm blown away by, and I have a gazillion questions that are more specific to the method itself. But how do you confront these things? Are you meant or made to deal with the ugliness and scum and shadowy aspects of transformation? Thank you.
Well, maybe we'll come back together as a group of 6 to bring this home then. With those
I appreciate that real talk, Tanya. I appreciate that real talk, because that's real talk, and if we had more time, we can later talk more about how Circle Forward sees that, or how I personally see that. That's real talk.
Can you give us a nugget?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I don't think it's human nature to be power over. I think and what we know from system science is the members of the system are shaped by the system. And when you can get a member, when a person can come into a different system, and this is what we find, people find themselves shifted and changed and sometimes healed. Not a healing modality, and I don't know, we don't normally want to get touchy-feely about things, but what we find is people come into the network, into the system, and they shift somewhat, even if they have positional power, or if they don't really share the purpose, because consent's based on a shared purpose. If they don't really share the purpose, they self-select out of that system. So they're either shifted by the system or they self-select out. So that's the one thing. And then the other thing is, like, my idea is we're not going to change that power over thing. That's breaking down. What we want to be able to do It's like we're living in a house, but the infrastructure is breaking down. I don't need to burn the house down. I live in the house, so I'm not trying to burn it down. I'm building my new house, and everybody's invited to the new house and designing the new house. So there's a quick.
Somebody left. Oh, Ben. Okay. No, he said. Yeah. What I was going to say is, we have a different type of violence, obviously, here in the U.S. and for communities of color. For me, the level of violence is that, especially in the South, we're more polite than we are honest. So you know what I'm saying? We're much more polite than we are honest, right? And that Southern, there's a very much, the violence is executed with a smile, right? The way, so the corruption exhibits itself through very kind acts, right? And so one of the goals for me as a person of color in these environments has been very, so we have we don't have like necessarily a regime, like this ultimately physically violent, but we do have this violence that's so embedded in the culture. And I have to be honest, Michelle is often having to coach me off, and other members of Circle Forward are having to coach me off the ledge because I'm one of the frontline folks, right, in dealing with that. And so you navigating, and I'm talking to you right now, where it turned into factions, right? Like people were factioned off and they were ready and they came, and the co-facilitator and myself, we had to be ready for that facilitator style. And what Michelle's talking about, for me, my experience, I can't speak to all experiences, but we were able to bring it down, right? We were able to get it down. And the faction that tried to rise up realized they didn't have power, they didn't have the ability to do it. And so they self-selected out. And my hope is that my hope is in the leaders that are trying to take space. Like those are the people we invest in because we want that to grow, because if that space grows, if that watering hole grows, then like you say, the house is burning down over here. You got to prepare the leaders to not be that. We will duplicate what we see, if we're not careful. That's, and I'm going to go off on a rant. I'm going to stop there and let Michelle's kind of response, but I know violence from a different form. And what keeps me in this work is that I'm seeing it break down. But it is a fight. And to let Celeste, to your point, about your currency, like I don't know if time banking is in England, but here, some of the groups we were working around, time banking, and I used to have an elder organizer who used to say to me that sometimes your work is a marooned effort. It is a marooned effort, meaning you have to take the gift, skills, talents that you've got, and you got to go and just do the thing, right? And fund it yourselves because, you're not in a position to get it done otherwise, right? So when you were talking, what came up for me is some things, some efforts or some funding, and the idea, time banking is what I would look up. You're talking about this community currency. If you don't know that already, it's a form of community currency that I was doing with asset-based community development. I just wanted to offer that, but I would, yeah. So that's how I would respond. That's the best response I have in this moment, but I got to think about it, and I will be thinking about it.
Well, and again, back to the notion of incompleteness, we have whatever time we need beyond this conversation to follow up in more specific ways, certainly can make sure everybody can find one another. But Michelle, do you have maybe a closing thought for us?
My closing thought is, first of all, thank you so much, and thanks for receiving us. But my closing thought is, it comes out of another response from Tanya, is collaborative governance, consent-based collaborative governance is in many ways one of the things that I saw that, like, this is what we've been needing. but it's not the only thing we're going to need to make this transition.
Yes.
We're going to need, we're going to probably get, when we take that power to a certain degree, there's probably going to be some force that's attempted to be put upon us. So we're still also going to need, I think, the skills of nonviolent direct action and the skills of mutual aid generally. And mutual aid, I work with a mutual aid cooperative using consent-based governance. So mutual health care, these things may be part of our transition. And so this is where I've put my groove. This is the groove I'm working. I think it's not all we need, but I think it's a big piece, and it's a big piece that's not seen. So my dream at the end of 2020 is that it would be more seen, and governance would be something we're all think is sexy and we're all doing and we all know how to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I just maybe note by way of my wrapping up that, this process is based on appreciative inquiry, which starts from what's working well, but it doesn't mean you don't talk about what isn't and what the challenges are and the problems. It's just that we want to build, from the foundation, from that positive core. And so there's no intention to dismiss, and get onto some fuzzy high of, wow, it's all going to work out because we just imagine that it will. And we're going to do a better job of working, of doing whatever we do when we build on those successes and on the existing visions that people hold and the work they're doing. And there is this sort of implication, I think, in the just transition, in that term, in that phrase, related to terms like the Great Turning, the shift, others that people have spoken of, a world that works for all, this kind of utopian notion. And there are a lot of people that never held to that, but even many of the people who have held to that are not particularly optimistic that that's going to happen. And so I think, to me, this work is relevant whether we, have the Great Turning or not. That the movement generation folks that I first heard the just transition language from say, transition's inevitable, a just transition is not. Things are changing, stuff's breaking down, new stuff's emerging, that's happening. How do we work with that field of change to bring justice into the center of it wherever we are? And so maybe another, I haven't heard this phrase, but maybe it's another thing to consider as a way that this work might apply is, how do we have a just collapse?
Ooh, preach. Yeah.
Or a more just collapse.
A more just collapse.
And that may be, and it's a both and perhaps. And Joanna Macy says, don't believe anybody who tells you they're sure that we're going to have the great unraveling or the great turning. There's just too much complexity and uncertainty and all. But either way, the work can look the same in many respects.
The coolest people are in this movement. People are, I think these folks are having the most deep, rich fun. I know.
Well, that reminds me of another little phrase that Rick Ingrassi, who is a convener out in the Pacific Northwest, says, if you want to change the culture, throw a better party.
Yes.
That's right.
The binaries. We
create. Rita, I would love to hear your 300 questions.
Yeah.
If you want to email me your questions anytime as they come up, send them to me. I'd love to answer them because they keep my thinking strong.
Thank you all so much.
And everybody else too.
Yeah, thank you, Dee and Michelle. I look forward to where we go from here.
Really, really.